Hello ladies and gentlemen, with the announcement of strengthening of older characters, I thought it would be interesting to release a video about reruns. Reruns are part of the natural cycle of the game and is integral to balancing. Rerun banners have been a staple of the game and continue to be released, even 3 at a time. However, like everything else in the world, it isn't perfect. Rerun banners have both good, bad, and ugly results to it that we will discuss today, with examples of characters alongside it. This is why the rerun system in StarRail isn't perfect. Let's start with the good part of reruns and what reruns do well. Obviously, reruns are amazing if the unit in question is actually really good. These characters, even though they aren't new anymore, are still valuable to pick up on due to their qualities. Specifically for newer players, they are recommended to pick up characters that have few competition in their field and is very useful to them. The best example of these units are sustains. The rerun value of sustains is quite weird. Once you own a sustain, the value of a sustain gets lower due to the fact that sustains have weaker vertical investment. Even with that said, sustains are still the rarest class in the game and can increase your comfort dramatically. Because of their nature as a commodity, you're more likely than not to get a rerun sustain first before a debuting limited sustain. If reruns didn't exist, imagine having the chance of getting a sustain once every half a year. The reason why sustains like Aventurine, Ling Sha, and Gallagher, and even Fu Xuan can last for so long is because the power creep for sustains is almost non-existent. So imagine instead of a rerun, a new sustain is released every 3 months. The result would be the sustain's power creeping itself, which is all around a terrible idea, in addition to the damage dealers power creeping each other. Thankfully, we don't live in that sort of reality. We can't mention good parts about reruns without limited supports. Limited supports are the same as sustains. They are rare and can make or break a team if you have them or not. Sustains may be useless for high investment accounts, but for any sort of account, pulling on a support is usually a really good idea. But the thing is that limited supports oftentimes release before their kit is at its peak. For example, Ron May was meta for DOT, but her real calling was Super Break a few months later. Robin was looked at as a side grade of Ron May on her release, but later on there was an exodus of follow-up attack spam she demolished with. For both of these units, their rerun banners was a welcome sight and gave them a second surge of sales for the sole reason that they became more coveted as time went on. Their teams developed into stronger picks than their initial releases would tell you. You can throw in Sunday for this idea too. It also gives people a chance to skip if doubt crosses their mind, with the insurance that limited supports won't be gone forever because they will be rerun someday. The good side of reruns is hindsight. Characters that get better over time justifies the reason why reruns should exist in the first place. It gives players a chance to pull something that they regretted skipping for the benefit of everyone involved. Of course, not all rerun characters are good. In fact, most of the time it's pretty bad. StarRail's fast-paced power creep and balancing affects reruns. Eidolons and vertical investment is meant to be a balancing tool to help players catch up using characters they already own. By pulling more of a character that you already owns Eidolons or light cones, you essentially keep them up to date. The problem is this is a really bad system. For example, Blade has one rerun. Logically, you can assume every Blade user to be at E1S1 for him to feel good in current content, which sounds good until you realize that if you were to start a fresh account, you have to spend twice as much for Blade compared to new characters for even worse returns. You can say the same thing with Kafka. The rerun system being balanced this way means that in most cases for damage dealers, pulling on reruns is a terrible idea due to the increasing cost that you can't catch up with if you even skip them once. And if you're a new player that likes old characters like Blade and Kafka, you pretty much are on a losing battle trying to pull for them and trying to get them to be viable. The balancing of units around reruns is just a really wacky system. But that's not all. It's bad enough that damage dealers over time are balanced by Eidolons on reruns. But how about we rerun a character for perfect synergy with a new banner character? Sounds good, right? And then we run a unit that's so similar to them that you can't even justify pulling on the rerun. Cue Jinyuan and Topaz. Jinyuan had his rerun with Sunday. It was cool to see his dramatic performance jump, but that was the last sign of life until Aglaya cut him out of his duties. It's honestly really funny because Aglaya and Jinyuan's teams are so similar that there became no more justification to pull Jinyuan over Aglaya, unless you have a tie type of course. But hey, at least it's not as bad as Topaz. In Topaz's case, the rise of the follow-up attack meta would theoretically mean that her rerun would do really well. The quote-unquote problem was that the devs, for once in a blue moon, made follow-up attack very accessible to cheap players with really good units like March and Motza. Even though Topaz can perform better, it kind of lost the point of Topaz as a unique sub-DPS enabler. Her main advantage over these 4 stars is having a higher investment ceiling and some better numbers, but it wasn't anything mind-blowing in terms of numbers, and having a high investment ceiling isn't really what people want out of a 5-star. It meant that Topaz being a rerun would be a lot like Blades. Good if you already have her, but it really sucks otherwise. But instead of a limited character power creeping her, like let's say Aglaya and Jing Yuan, a strong set of 4 stars sent Topaz's rerun value down the toilet. While these 2 character reruns made a lot of sense in their timing, their kits being perfectly synergistic to the new character actually hurt them more than helped them, and another example of how reruns could go really badly. Being a rerun synergistic to a new support could mean that you're near the door to be replaced by a similar unit that's cheaper. Or maybe your rerun doesn't perform well because the other characters already do your job well enough for a cheaper price. All of these examples are pretty bad, but how can we get worse? Of course, based on the entire concept of this video, there's reruns that are good, there's reruns that are bad, and a certain section that is just ugly. Well, let's start off with one you've probably been thinking the entire time from the moment you've seen this video. Like we mentioned with Blade, Eidolons are meant to be stepping stones to progressively strengthen a character over time, if you want to keep using characters that you already own anyway. The problem with Zila specifically is they really didn't know how to do this at first. Zila's Eidolons are what you can consider really ugly. E1 is meh, E2 is okay, E4 is actually good but not for that price, and E6 is really underwhelming. Zila's Eidolons are so minimal that even if you do highly invest in your Zila, her Eidolons aren't strong enough to make her catch up with reruns. The DPS increase for each Zila Eidolon is pretty bad compared to others, and it's just not worth the price at all. As the first limited character, the devs probably couldn't have anticipated this, so I'll cut them some slack here. They learned their lesson and made E2s feel like completely different characters instead of whatever they did with Zila. But regardless of what they're doing now, the ugly side of reruns has a unique contender in Zila. A kit whose Eidolons weren't tested for future power, that effectively rerunning Zila becomes pointless outside of the dedicated fanbase that still wants to pull her. But how else could you make reruns really ugly? Silverwolf. It's not even like Zila's where Silverwolf has bad Eidolons. Her E1 is actually pretty funny, I guess. But it's because of how you can trivialize a kit's entire niche over time even though it should have been really strong. Silverwolf in the first place seemed fairly future-proof due to the fact that weaknesses actually mattered. But that wasn't to be. First, they released a game mode where Silverwolf had no chance of being even better than her 4-star downgrade. Then, they released an entire meta that would have made her good, but her unique niche became a common property among the strongest units. Then, they released another game mode where her unique trait of brute forcing is actively being countered. The ugly side of reruns involves the kit itself being trivialized. Silverwolf's niche was simply made weak due to the fact that they made it so available to the units that actually needed it. And due to that, no matter how many reruns you throw Silverwolf on, it's going to be extremely difficult to find a reason to pull her, and ends up being a dead slot that could have been a much better rerun, like let's say maybe Jiao Chou. Unless of course, they keep their word and change this. Like I said at the top, the problems and good things about reruns is how they interact with power creep and the ecosystem of HSR. If all characters were viable at the same cost, all reruns will feel good. If only some units feel good, same thing. The way reruns are balanced to update characters is flawed since new players can't ever win that battle. But with the announcement of strengthening older characters, hopefully this becomes a thing of the past, and we can only see the reruns being a good thing to look forward to. Anyway, I hope you liked that video. Like, comment, subscribe, do the algorithm stuff, and I'll see you in another video this week. Bye bye.